In the 1940s, ordinary families were pulling harvests so massive they shocked government officials, sometimes producing more food per square foot than commercial farms. Fast forward to today, and we're more dependent on fragile supply chains than ever, with grocery prices climbing higher each season. The contrast is staggering. Back then, self-sufficiency was survival, while now most of us rely entirely on stores that can empty overnight. What was their secret? A simple garden plan, distributed during wartime, that turned backyards into abundant food factories. And the blueprint still exists, but almost no one remembers it. It's 1944. The world is at war, and America's home front is stretched thin. Ration books sit on kitchen tables, their pages worn from constant use. Sugar, meat, and canned goods are scarce. Families line up at corner stores, only to find shelves half empty, prices creeping higher, and neighbors whispering about shortages that might last for months. But step outside into the crisp spring air, and you'll see something remarkable. Behind modest houses, in narrow backyards and vacant lots, the soil is alive. Rows of beans, carrots, and cabbages push through the earth. Chickens scratch in makeshift coops. Children carry tin watering cans, their shoes muddy, their faces lit with determination. Mothers kneel in the dirt, planting seedlings with care, while fathers hammer together wooden frames for trellises. The garden is no longer a hobby, it's survival. The government had urged citizens to plant victory gardens, and the response was overwhelming. By 1944, nearly 20 million American families were growing food at home. Imagine that. City blocks transformed into patchwork farms, schoolyards turned into potato fields, even rooftops sprouting tomatoes in tin buckets. The nation produced over 8 million tons of food this way, nearly half of all vegetables consumed in the United States.
Picture a small family in Ohio. The father works long shifts at the factory, building parts for airplanes. The mother manages the household, stretching rations to feed 3 children. Their backyard is no bigger than a tennis court, but every inch is planned with precision. The soil is dark and rich from compost piles they've tended all winter. Rows are straight, marked with string, and each crop has its place. Beans climbing poles, lettuce tucked between taller plants, squash sprawling at the edges. The children know their chores by heart. One weeds, another waters. The youngest gathers eggs from the hens. They laugh, they argue, but they understand the stakes. Every carrot pulled from the ground means one less trip to the store. Every basket of beans means a meal that doesn't depend on ration stamps. The air smells of earth and sweat, but also of hope. Neighbors lean over fences, trading seeds and advice. Plant your tomatoes deep, one says. Save your onion skins for broth, another adds. These gardens are more than food. They are community, resilience, and quiet defiance against scarcity. And yet, behind the beauty of these scenes lies a secret. The abundance wasn't random. Families weren't just scattering seeds and hoping for the best. They followed a plan, a carefully designed layout distributed by agricultural experts. It told them exactly what to plant, where to plant it, and how to rotate crops for maximum yield. This wasn't guesswork. It was science, strategy, and survival rolled into one. That plan, born in the crucible of war, produced harvests so massive they stunned observers. And though decades have passed, the blueprint still exists. The question is, could it work again today, in our own backyards, as grocery prices climb and supply chains falter?
The family's garden wasn't just a patch of dirt, it was a battlefield plan. Every square foot had a purpose, every row a strategy. The government pamphlets of the 1940s didn't simply say, grow food. They handed out blueprints, diagrams that looked almost military in their precision. And families followed them because they had to. The layout was simple but brilliant. Tall crops like corn and pole beans were placed at the northern edge so they wouldn't cast shadows over shorter vegetables. Root crops, carrots, beets, onions, were tucked neatly in the center rows, where the soil was deepest and easiest to work. Leafy greens like lettuce and spinach filled the gaps, thriving in the cool shade between larger plants. Squash and pumpkins sprawled along the edges, their broad leaves acting like living mulch, suppressing weeds and locking in moisture. It was a design that wasted nothing, a plan that turned even a small backyard into a miniature farm. But layout was only half the secret. Soil was the foundation, and families treated it like treasure. Compost piles became common sights behind garages and sheds. Kitchen scraps, chicken manure, and autumn leaves were layered and turned, breaking down into rich, black humus. This wasn't just about feeding plants, it was about feeding the earth itself. The pamphlets urged families to rotate crops, never planting the same vegetable in the same spot 2 years in a row. That simple rotation kept the soil balanced, prevented exhaustion, and reduced disease. Crop selection was equally strategic. Families weren't planting exotic varieties or chasing novelty. They grew staples: beans, potatoes, carrots, cabbage, foods that stored well, filled stomachs, and provided nutrition through long winters. Tomatoes were prized for canning, cucumbers for pickling, and peas for drying. Every choice was practical. Every harvest meant survival.
And what about pests? Chemical sprays were scarce, often reserved for military use, so families relied on ingenuity. They planted marigolds and nasturtiums along borders to deter insects. They hand-picked beetles from leaves, dropped them into jars of kerosene. Ashes from the wood stove were sprinkled between rows to discourage slugs. Chickens roamed freely, scratching up grubs and fertilizing the soil as they went. Pest control wasn't a product, it was a practice, woven into daily life. Timing mattered too. Families knew the rhythm of the seasons. Seeds went into the ground as soon as the frost lifted, often under cold frames made from salvaged glass. Succession planting kept the garden alive all summer. Radishes followed lettuce, beans followed peas. By staggering crops, they ensured a steady stream of food instead of one overwhelming glut. And when autumn came, root cellars filled with potatoes, carrots, and jars of preserved vegetables, enough to carry families through the lean months. This was the system: layout, soil, crops, pests, timing. Not complicated, not high-tech, but astonishingly effective. It was a plan that turned scarcity into abundance, fear into resilience. And the most remarkable part? It wasn't designed for experts. It was built for ordinary families with ordinary backyards who simply followed the steps and reaped extraordinary harvests. So what does this mean for you today? Look around. Grocery bills keep climbing, shelves sometimes sit half-stocked, and the quality of store-bought produce often leaves us questioning what we're really eating. Supply chains stretch across oceans, vulnerable to every disruption. But imagine stepping into your own backyard and seeing rows of food you planted, harvested, and controlled. No middlemen, no inflated prices, no mystery chemicals, just independence. The same system that carried families through the 1940s can carry you now, turning even a small patch of soil into security, resilience, and freedom.
Think of it as a journey, not a checklist. Phase 1 begins in the quiet of late winter, when the soil still sleeps. Families of the 1940s would prepare by turning compost into the earth, mending fences, and sketching layouts on scrap paper. Preparation wasn't glamorous. It was anticipation, the promise of life hidden beneath frost. Then comes planting, seeds pressed into rows with care, children dropping beans into furrows, mothers covering them with soil. Each crop had its place, each timing deliberate. Early greens for spring, sturdy roots for summer, sprawling squash for autumn. Planting was hope made visible. Protection followed. Gardens were guarded not by chemicals, but by vigilance. Chickens patrolled for pests, marigolds stood as sentinels, and neighbors shared tricks to keep slugs at bay. Families watched over their plots like soldiers guarding a fortress. Harvest was the reward, baskets brimming with beans, tomatoes glowing red, potatoes unearthed like treasure. It was abundance, but also responsibility. And finally, storage. Root cellars filled, jars lined shelves, and families knew winter would not break them. Survival wasn't just about eating, it was about carrying summer's labor into the cold months ahead. That rhythm, that cycle, is timeless. Modern gardeners often fall into traps the 1940s families avoided. First, they plant without a plan, scattering crops randomly instead of following a layout that maximizes space and sunlight. Second, they lean too heavily on store-bought fertilizers and sprays, forgetting that compost and rotation once kept soil fertile and pests at bay. Third, they chase novelty, exotic plants that look impressive but don't feed a family or store well. By contrast, the wartime method was practical, disciplined, and focused on survival. It wasn't flashy, but it was smarter, because every decision served the harvest, not the hobby.
Close your eyes and picture it. You step into your backyard on a warm summer morning. The air is heavy with the scent of tomatoes ripening on the vine, beans dangling in clusters, and squash sprawling across the soil. You bend down, pull a carrot from the earth, and feel the weight of independence in your hand. No checkout lines, no inflated bills, just food you grew, waiting to feed your family. Imagine opening your pantry, shelves lined with jars, knowing you've secured tomorrow's meals. That confidence, that peace, is what the 1940s families lived, and what you can reclaim. History shows us that ordinary families once fed themselves through discipline, planning, and resilience. The 1940s garden plan wasn't just about vegetables, it was about freedom in uncertain times. Today, as prices rise and supply chains falter, the lesson is clear. Independence begins in the soil beneath our feet. The future belongs to those who take ownership of their food, their security, and their survival. If you believe self-reliance still matters, subscribe and join a movement that ties the wisdom of the past to the strength of tomorrow. Your backyard could be the beginning of something powerful.